Thanks for watching us, and here on World Insight we're going to go into our final minutes on this program. For our last story we're going to take you to China, where on December 18th, 1978, the country embarked on its policy of reform and opening up. Now in the 30 years since, it's seen much development and greatly expanded its role, of course, in global affairs. Milestones include the return of Hong Kong and Macau, and this year's Beijing Olympics, and the Shenzhou 7 manned space flight. Today, in the lead-up to that 30th anniversary of that Red Letter Day, we bring you one man's dream and one man's story of how the changes have impacted overseas Chinese.
要不要先上去？好了，我先上去也行。我先上去吧。好了，来，我领路。那个是九桃饼，中国人很最喜欢。
79-year-old Shan Sheng is a real estate agent in London.
封在那个。
Although he's been in Europe for more than 50 years, his passion for China is reflected in every corner of his home. These certificates testify to Shan Sheng's active role in many organizations in China and for overseas Chinese in the UK. Through his involvement in their activities, Shan has been on good terms with leaders from both China and Britain.
我在这里。 我在这里，我因为高啊，在前面挡住人，所以他们把我放到后边去，放到后边去。
But things were not easy at the beginning. In 1951, Shan Sheng sailed to Europe. 3 years later, the 25-year-old was awarded his doctorate in France and came to study in Britain. But he soon found out, for a Chinese, a good degree didn't guarantee a job.
学财务的可以进银行，可以开那个财务公司。
British graduates could become a lawyer or an accountant if they got a degree in related fields. But for overseas Chinese, that was impossible. It did not matter how good your score was. There were job vacancies, but back then they were not meant for overseas Chinese. That is what I call discrimination.
优秀的话。
Although a number of Chinese settled in the UK at that time, few were lucky enough to get permission to work.
如果有个公司找到你。
In the 1950s, if you were offered a position in a company, you would have to change your visa from a student visa to a work visa. But to do this, you'd have to leave Britain and apply from somewhere else, say China or Spain. You could only come back with a work visa. Housing was also difficult. There were houses for rent, but more often than not, you would find a notice displayed outside the house saying, whites only.
But despite such difficulties, Shan decided to stay, mostly because of what he saw in the late 1970s.
我1978年第一次回国，因为
When I went back to China in 1978, what I saw was insufficiency. People had to use coupons to buy rationed food and clothing. Back then, we had to change planes in Hong Kong to get to the mainland. When we arrived in Hong Kong, people would buy candies, clothes, and rice for relatives in China. At that time, there was a huge gap between people inside China and those living overseas.
For Shan Sheng, 1978 was unforgettable. For the first time in 27 years, he returned home. What he found was poverty, with a per capita GDP of 381 yuan, about $220 US. But for Shan's relatives, the year was probably unforgettable in a more significant way. It marked the beginning of a profound change that would transform China almost completely. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping began to design the reform and opening up policy, right after the third plenary session of the 11th CPC Central Committee. It was the beginning of what's been called China's economic miracle. In 1978, total GDP was less than 400 billion yuan. But by 2007, the figure had increased 67 times to some 25 trillion. With an average annual growth of nearly 10%, China's development has stunned the world as well as Shan Sheng.
但是现在不一样了，现在我们回去 大陆的人的生活好过我们。
The last 30 years have been beyond our wildest imagination. Now, things are totally different. For instance, a dinner could cost as much as 1,000 yuan in China. For overseas Chinese, this is too extravagant, but for local Chinese, they say it's fine. We used to think that people living outside China are enjoying a better life, but now it's the opposite. Many of my friends have resettled back in China, and I visit them every now and then. They say there's no way that they are coming back to the UK. They believe there is no place better than China.
And Shan believes the development has also benefited Chinese students studying abroad.
现在情况不一样了。现在毕业以后，如果你拿到英国的文凭，拿到英国的
Now, students don't have to leave Britain to have their visa changed. They don't even have to change their visa anymore, because now, with a student visa, a Chinese student can immediately start work in the UK 1 or 2 years after graduation. The British government doesn't want Chinese students to leave. They want them to come. And all these changes are due to the 30 years of reform and opening up.
Shan Sheng makes regular visits to his hometown. And every time, he sees great changes taking place there. He'd like to stay, but says he can't because of his business and family. Although he can't be in China all the time, Shan says he feels proud to be a Chinese and is confident for the country's bright future.
And in a footnote to that story, Shan Sheng turns 80 this year. He says that as he gets older, his sense of belonging towards China gets even stronger. He also says deep inside he feels the fate of the country is so closely connected to that of the overseas Chinese. Well, with that, we come to the end of this program. If you've got comments or suggestions, you know what to do. You can email us at worldinsight@cctv.com. Otherwise, we'll see you at the same time next week for a brand new program. I'm James Chow from me and the team here in Beijing. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.